Welcome, Money Buddies, to this week's episode of Money Talk. This week we're talking about money memories, understanding all the stuff around us that influences our money, and how to bring about real change with our dollars. I'm your host, Skylar Fleming, and let's get talking. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I'm super excited to bring to you today's conversation. We're talking about a whole lot of great things, from what's your first money memory to understanding how both saving and spending are dangerous, and those extremes and focusing too much on one end or the other can be dangerous, whether you're saving too much money or spending too much money. And then we're going to talk about how you can move from either of those mindsets to a healthy place with your money. Because of course, awareness and saying, yeah, I have some financial struggles, that's a good step to get to. And just understanding that you have financial challenges is a good place to get to. But how do you actually make lasting changes with our behavior? That's what today's Money Buddy and I are talking about. And we're also going to talk about some great points about how all of these marketing departments and sales departments, they just want to take money from us. And you're going to hear one specific idea that was eye-opening to me when it comes to consumerism and when it comes to buying things and what these companies are trying to make you feel. So make sure you listen to all of today's interview because you're not going to want to miss it. It was a fantastic conversation and I know that you're going to enjoy it. And then next week, we have a very special episode that you're not going to want to miss. So make sure you subscribe. But let's get into today's episode and introduce today's Money Buddy, Hanna Horvath. Where traditional finance advice focuses on what to do with your money, Hanna, a CFP professional, explores why we behave the way we do with it. Through her newsletter called Your Brain on Money and her platform, she helps people understand the psychological and cultural forces that drive financial decisions. And you're absolutely going to enjoy today's conversation. So here's this week's money talking points. 1, what's your first money memory? 2, why is money so challenging? And 3, how important is our mindset with money? So make sure you take those money talking points and go start your own money talk with a family member, a friend, and anyone who you want to talk to about money, because when we all talk about money, we all do better with money together. So with those money talking points in mind, let's get talking and welcome Hanna to the show.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation, and I'm pretty sure if I looked through past episodes, I probably say that every time. So let's go ahead and just dive in here to the beginning of this conversation with the money talking points. And just a reminder for everyone listening, these are the simple, easy conversation starters for you to go and start your own money talk. So Hanna, let's kick it off with one of my favorite questions to ask anybody. What's your first money memory?
I would say my first money memory is probably I was at a toy store with my grandma, and I remember I really wanted to buy one of those like squishy ball things. I don't know the term for it, squishy ball thing. And I remember my grandma kind of saying to me, she was like, "Oh no, like we can't afford that." Or like, we can't buy that. I don't know. I don't think she meant that literally because I think it was like $5 or something at the time. However, that really anchored in my mind of like, because in my childlike brain, I'm like, oh, I want this thing. I should just get it. Right. And then I that's when I started to really develop. I might have been 4 or 5 at the time. I started to really start to understand, oh, there's this thing that can prevent you from getting the thing that you want. And that's money. And I think that was kind of the first real memory I have around money and being aware of it existing in the world.
Yeah. And as a fellow money nerd, why do you think understanding that memory and maybe thinking back to it can be important for maybe people who don't think about money regularly?
Yes. So I would say, first money memories typically involve your family, and they oftentimes are not actually about money. They're often about what money meant in your family. And for whatever reason, your brain has decided to anchor onto that memory and hold on to it. So it can help you identify how you think about money and the feelings associated with money. Because a lot of people are very, very different of how the role money plays in their lives and emotions around it. Because the meaning that you assign to money really becomes kind of the programming that runs in the background of your brain and sort of drives a lot of your financial decisions.
Yeah, you just said exactly what I wanted to hit on there, that this first money memory you're going to be able to connect dots on how you use money now to that memory. For me, one of my first cornerstone money memories is saving up allowances and things from chores and odd and end jobs as a kid, and then going to Disneyland and like worrying the whole time what I'm going to spend this money on, and then deciding to spend it on just one big toy there. And I've done that my entire life, where I'll save and save and save. I'm really good at saving money, but when I choose to spend it, it's all going on one big thing. So able to connect the dots on that, it's kind of fun to look back, and it's not a problem that I spent it in that way, but it's cool to see that's always been a pattern in my life, that I'll save up for something that I really want and then I'll spend it. And it just happens to be that they're usually a little more expensive than these little things here and there. But that's a great money talking point for everyone to take, and like ask your coworkers. It's really fun. And sometimes it'll bring tears. Some people will be super excited to talk about it. So it's a question that can go in all sorts of different directions. But it
Yeah.
could also help you unlock that money isn't easy. Maybe your first money memory is your parents going through bankruptcy or something challenging, or debt payoff because your parents were always saddled with debt. Why is money so challenging as we start thinking back on all these different ways that it impacts us?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people have a tendency to think of money as this cold, objective thing. Like it's just math, it's just numbers. But I would argue, and kind of the core of all the work that I do, is that money is really so rooted in our sense of self and is so behaviorally driven. And so a lot of my work talks about kind of what I say are the three things that really influence all our money decisions, which is our internal. So, the beliefs we have about money from those early childhood memories, the social pressure, that's number two. So, like things around us, our community, social media influences from there. And the third thing is like the world around us. So, the policies and products that we interact with. And so, all those three things together have an enormous impact on our money. We're oftentimes not even aware of the impact it has on us. And so, money can feel very challenging for people because they're not aware of just how many things are influencing them. And so I talk to so many people that feel like they struggle with money or feel like they're like quote unquote bad with money. And I always say a lot of it is not because you're lacking discipline. It's really because you have all these unconscious patterns. And we're also existing in a world with all of these forces around us that are designed to essentially, get us to spend more and save less. And so, I think that's why it's just such a problem for people to tackle because, like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, it's so emotional and rooted in your sense of self. And until you have that awareness of even that fact, it's hard to kind of take that next step.
Yeah, if you aren't aware that there's so many emotions that go into our money, like marketing departments are so good at controlling those emotions. And that's kind of one of the external factors you were speaking to there, is they set up every little piece at every single store to optimize you to spend money and to give them your money, whether it's the pricing structure or whether it's those stores that everything's on sale. So is it really ever on sale? But it makes you feel like it is, right? Like you go in that store and you feel this sense of, wow, I'm getting this for a deal when it's the same price every other day of the year, right? There's so many things that go into manipulating us with our money. That's why it can be so hard. Because if you just view money as this thing that I make and this thing that I spend, there's so many other things that are going to get in between that make it difficult, like you said. And that's what
Yeah,
can be so
completely.
challenging with our mindset. Don't you agree?
I completely agree. And I always tell people, like, have a little self-compassion. Like you're just one
Yeah.
human with one brain operating in this world where companies are spending millions and millions of dollars to kind of like psychologically manipulate you into spending money. Like, just like give yourself a little bit of grace.
Yeah, manipulation's a big word, but I mean, it's really what they're doing. Like, there is so
Yeah.
much money, supercomputers, right? Fast data processing that goes into, oh, you search this one thing. Like, there's
Yeah.
been reports recently about like the customized pricing that these
Like
companies have been
dynamic
doing with
pricing.
yeah. And that is
Yeah.
insane. Like, when you really start diving
Yeah.
into it and you think they're only making maybe 50, 60 cents more on this one person than the other, but that adds up to be so much. There's a great, I think it's Consumer Reports, that has done a whole bunch of research around that, if anyone's interested in diving into
Hmm.
that. But that's one way that our mind is manipulated. So we really need to be in control of our mindset and be in control of how we're thinking about money. How do you think, or how important is mindset when it comes to managing our money?
Yeah. So I think there is like a part of like the big world of personal finance advice that is like hyper focused on mindset and money. And I do agree that mindset matters enormously, but what is really critical, and we had kind of had just touched on this, mindset alone is not enough when you're like up against these. So I'm kind of a big fan of like holding these two truths at the same time where, okay, it's important to do that mindset work. It's important to understand your internalized money beliefs, bring more awareness to your spending, understand that you have a degree of agency when it comes to your money, but you also need to understand, like, because this kind of goes to the self-compassion piece. Like, you need to understand this, a lot of the system could be working against you. Like, it's not all just on you, you can't really like positive affirmation your way out
Hmm.
of, a system that's designed to make you feel inadequate, so you spend more money to feel better. So I think the mindset work is like very important, and that's something that you yourself can control. So I'm a big fan of that, but I think it's also important to also recognize kind of the external forces.
Yeah. And you said a key piece there of recognizing that these marketing teams and these sales companies that are trying to get you to buy things are trying to make you feel inferior so that
Yeah.
their product makes you feel superior, right? Like that's their whole entire structure. And once you
Yeah.
realize that, it kind of makes you cringe and like, that is crazy that they're trying so hard to make me feel like less of a person. And yeah, like you said, you can't just go into that thinking I'm good with money, right? Like you have to have a little bit more awareness around all this and what's going on to be able to step out of it for a second and say, no, they're just trying to get me to think I really need this gadget for this other gadget, right? Like there's all these things just trying to pull away from our money. But that does it for the 3 money talking points. So everyone listening, make sure you take those and just go have a simple conversation. Even just there, we had a fun 10-minute conversation about money mindset, it being challenging, and our first money memory. But Hannah, I want to get into an exercise that you do. Can you teach us a little bit about what your first money memory exercise is?
Yeah, so it's very similar to the first question you asked as part of the talking points, but it's really just a awareness exercise to just bring more understanding into why you have the feelings and beliefs about money that you do. It helps you understand like your foundational beliefs about money. And a lot of those beliefs, like I was saying before, came from your family and just early experiences you had with money. So the way that this exercise works is really just like I'm a big fan of like getting a piece of paper and just like free writing because I think that helps kind of get a lot of those thoughts out, but you can also just kind of sit and think about it. Sitting down and thinking about, again, what is your earliest memory with money, which is kind of an exercise we just went through. I actually recommend doing a couple so you can get a couple different things to pull from. If there was a recurring theme in your childhood around money, like if you felt like your parents were constantly fighting about money or you were constantly told, like, oh, we can't afford this or anything like that, that would be a good thing to write down. And then the second thing, which is big, is noticing the emotions that you feel when you're recalling these memories. Are you feeling shame or pride or excitement? This is a piece that's missing from a lot of work people do with money because they're not always connecting their emotions to their financial behaviors. Once you identify the emotions, it's like, okay, identify the meaning. Like, why do you feel this
Mm-hmm.
emotion when you're thinking about this memory? Um, and so I think for me, when I think about my early money memory, for me, it was rooted in this idea of, money is safety and security. And so that, this idea, I even see this, play in my adult life. You gave the example of Disney World and how that plays out in your adult life. For me, oftentimes when someone had to go on a trip or go out to dinner, my gut reaction is like, oh, I can't afford that. Even if I can, it's just like that internalized kind of perception I have with money that anything that's going to kind of cause me to spend money will affect my security and safety. So then I don't want to do it. And so then I think from there, once you kind of connect those two things and start to see how it shows up in your adult life, these patterns, then you can start to say, okay, now I'm starting to understand my current money behaviors, what it's rooted in. And once you have that awareness, you can start to actually, interrupt the patterns and, do more behavior change.
Yeah, and that is a huge deal because as you were talking, I started to think, well, what other aspects does that whole saving for something and then spending on one really big thing play into it? And it does make it easier for me to be able to save for deferred gratification, right? I'm thankful for that. It makes it a little easier to invest for retirement, but it
Yeah.
also makes it harder to spend on the here and now for experiences, right? It's harder to say, yeah, let's do this thing tonight or let's do this weekend because I'm thinking, well, that 40 or 50 bucks could go into a retirement account, right? So there's
Yeah.
both sides of the equation on every single one of these. Like you could have a fantastic money memory about saving money and it's the easiest thing for you, but there's going to be a flip side of it that's difficult. And you could have a great money memory about spending time with family and spending money to spend time with family. But on the flip side of it, maybe you try to spend too much. There's both sides of the coin here. And I think that's what's important to recognize. And I do want to talk about extremes for a moment. I want to head in that direction of let's look at both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
And how can these extremes be so dangerous? Like I could take my money memory and say, yeah, I'm good at saving money and only save money. But how can only going in one direction with these thoughts and working on our behaviors be a bit of a challenge?
Yeah. So when I think about extremes, and so I'm someone who really advocates for any sort of financial behavior where you're centering money as part of your identity is not a good thing. And it can be, like you said, on kind of both sides. You can take someone who is spending a ton of money, and for them, consumption or spending money is a big part of their identity. If you think about like Confessions of a Shopaholic, great example. And then the other end of that, you get people that are compulsively saving. If you think about people that are like really, really strict adherents to the FIRE movement and
Hmm.
they're saving 70, 80% of their income, in a lot of cases, their identity is saving. That's a huge part of how they see the world and how they see themselves. And so when your money behavior is such a core part of your identity, well, then when something happens or something changes, that can be very destabilizing. And you want to kind of be able to separate your money behavior from how you perceive yourself. And so a lot of times what'll happen with extreme behaviors is they could be trauma responses from previous experiences you've had with money. You're reacting to prior experiences you've had. Maybe you've gone through a really traumatic financial event like a bankruptcy or losing your house, and that can lead to these kind of extreme behaviors because you're almost trying to like course correct in your mind. What a lot of people realize that might miss the mark is that both of these extremes are trying to solve an emotional problem with a financial strategy. Like you can't necessarily save or budget your way out of this scarcity mindset or fear you have about money. And you can't spend your way into having self worth and feeling good about yourself. And so, understanding these two extremes and really advocating for, as I'm sure you do as well, is like, what is the balance? What is the conscious choice you can make? How can you save and spend in a way that's aligned with your values rather than being driven by these like unconscious beliefs you have about money?
And that even gets to a similar point that we were saying with letting the stores and marketing departments control how we handle money if we're not aware of that piece. But
Yeah.
also on that same internal piece, we need to be aware of the underlying behavior, because you can find a strategy to do whatever you want to do, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's saving a ton of money and racing to financial independence just to realize that you still feel like you don't have enough. So you keep working one more year and one more year. And it's the most grueling work because you don't need to be there. And that's super like hard to deal with, but you've never addressed that underlying piece. I think, like you said, there's those three different areas that you mentioned, but each of them have like things underneath them that we need to address and make sure we're aware of before we can really utilize these strategies well. Because maybe you are really good at saving money and maybe that's what you need to do right now, but take a step back and say, okay, it's not really saving money isn't the challenge. I can obviously do that. How can I address these other pieces? How important do you think it is for people to, or I guess what I want to ask is, how have you seen that help people when they start to address those areas? Like, how does this change
Oh,
people's perspective on money?
yeah, I think it changes it completely. I can even use myself as a personal example. Money is a tool to help you live the life you want to live. It's really not about the number. It's about what money is doing for you. And so, and understandably so, it's a lot easier to benchmark yourself against other people when you're looking at a number rather than these kind of qualitative metrics. Like, how are we defining a good life? There's no one definition. Everybody has their own definition. And so, if you don't understand the type of life you want to live, what your values are, a lot of times you are going to kind of use your money to live someone else's life or just kind of do what you see other people doing or what you think you should be doing. And that will lead to kind of this like sense of discontent because again, you're not, using your money in a way that would actually bring you satisfaction. And so I'll give the example of, I have a scarcity mindset with money and a lot of my 20s were spent, compulsively saving. And I was like, well, like, I want to feel stable and I want to be perceived as someone who is stable and is like financially well. And so, it's like, okay, I see other people my age buying a house. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm saving up money to buy a house. And so I'm saving up money. And I kept telling myself, when I hit this benchmark, I'm going to feel less anxious. Then I'd hit it and then I'd be like, okay, what's next? What's next? And I remember I got to this point where I was like really thinking about buying a home. I live in New York, which, everybody probably knows this by now. It's a very expensive housing
Mm-hmm.
market. So, I was looking for homes and I was thinking to myself, well, is this actually what I want? Is this part of my values? Is this actually something that's important to me? And I really started thinking through my values, and my values are very much centered around optionality and flexibility. And those two things are a little bit at odds with owning a home. If you think about
Mm-hmm.
how you want to spend your money. So that was a signal to me of like, okay, I'm not using my money. I'm letting other people dictate how I should be saving and using my money. And so that was a wake up call for me to like reevaluate how much money I really need to live the life I want to live because that number is going to be different for everybody. So I think it can completely change how you view your money and how you make financial decisions. And the last thing I'll say is that when you know yourself, you know your values and what will actually bring you joy when it comes to your money, it is so much easier to say yes to the right things and no to the things that are
Mm-hmm.
not going to actually make you happy. And so I think overall it just brings a lot more, contentedness and clarity and confidence with your money.
I really love the idea there that money is moving in this direction of it being a tool for your values and goals, right? Financial
Yeah.
coaching, financial education and literacy, and financial planning is moving in that direction of saying, here's your goals and let's find a plan that meets those. And I really like what you said there because the house example is the exact same sort of thing for my wife and I, that we were just putting small amounts of money that were never going to end up equaling a down payment, right? But we were
Yeah.
told that we needed to save for a house. We were told we needed to buy
Yeah.
for a house. And then we got to the point where we're like, this has a few $1,000s in it. Like it's not going to get us into a home per se, but is that even what we need right now? We've been renting
Yeah.
for the last 3 or 4 years and it's worked really well for us to be able to travel and potentially move if we needed to. Like you said, that optionality and flexibility was a huge deal for us in our stage of life. And that's what I recently did an episode talking about, like how you need to make sure your goals are actually yours because it's so
Yeah.
easy for all these different companies to tell you what you should spend money on. It's also so easy
Absolutely.
for them and for other people to tell you what you should base your goals on. How important do you think it is to actually view money as a tool? We've talked about how it unlocks your mindset, right?
I think it's everything. I think money should not be the end in itself. It is really the tool for living the life you want because if you're saving but never using money to create that life that you want, what is it for?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to what you said, if you're not defining that for yourself, all these external forces are going to define that for you. And there's always going to be someone wealthier, unless Elon Musk is listening to this podcast right now. There's always going to be somebody wealthier. So if you're fixating on the numbers, the goalpost is going to just keep moving. And so that's why it's important to start to think through, well, like, okay, I'm saving all this money, I'm doing all this stuff, but what am I actually using this for? Like, what is the end state here? And a lot of times it's not a physical thing. A lot of times it's like a state of being, whether that be the flexibility to travel whenever you want, or being able to live close to your family and having community. And so that's why I think it's very worthwhile to think through these things because I think it really does raise a lot of realizations about the role that money can play in your life.
Your goal might be to buy a house, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like you can have these goals and they can be yours, but the key thing to do, and I use this as kind of the action item from that episode that I mentioned, is write down the goals that you have in your mind and then write down next to it whose like voice or whose personality
Mm,
you hear telling you that. Like maybe it's you write, oh, it's the news that's telling me I should have that goal, or it's my parents
mm,
that are telling me I should have that goal. And then right, if there's one that says it's you telling you should have that goal, that's a goal that you really need to drive towards and make
yeah.
sure that you're actively working on. And once you
Yeah.
start to realize that money is this tool that's going to get you there, like you mentioned, there's always going to be someone richer. And if you're only focusing on money, there's going to potentially be someone that's happier or has the lifestyle that
Yeah.
you want to live. And you're always going to be chasing something else. So that's why it's so key
Yeah.
to align those goalposts, like you said, and hone in on what you really want. And the other idea that I had come to my mind is it's not all about the money because there's that story out there that talks about the guy who goes to fish every day, right? I can't remember the entire story, but he goes out to fish
Mm,
every day. And then someone shows up and says, hey, you're really good at fishing. You should turn this into a business. And he's like, well, I just want to fish, right? So instead of maybe scaling everything to be the best optimal thing ever, maybe you're living the lifestyle right now that's optimal for you. Maybe you don't need to go chase a bigger job or make more money because you're enjoying your lifestyle as it is. And that's where, if we step outside of just focusing on the numbers, we can really say, yeah, my lifestyle is good and I like the job I work and I like the pattern that I have. And then you can stick to that. And then that's a point of real freedom and release. And so much stress comes off your back if you stop just chasing this endless cycle of improvement.
I completely agree. I mean, we are in a culture of more, whether that
Mm-hmm.
be optimization, maximizing, or just like pure consumption, buying things. And all of that is driven by, you know, marketing. And I love what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, where like I would say the vast majority of marketing is aspirational marketing, as I said. And so if you feel inadequate in some way, or if you feel like you're in a place of lack, it is way easier for you to be sold to. And it's way easier for somebody else to tell you how you should be spending your money, how you should be living your life. So if you're able to reach that place of contentedness where you're not constantly striving, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have any goals, but like,
Mm-hmm.
finding a balance that's aligned with kind of what you want to do and less like what all these external voices are telling you to do, it's way easier to not be sold to be more deliberate about the financial decisions you're making and just like feel better about, because like if most of your money is going to things that genuinely bring you joy, you're going to be way happier than someone who's making double what you're making but spending money on things that they're not even aware of and feeling inadequate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you ever, this book just came to my mind. Have you ever read or heard the book No New Things?
I haven't.
You should check that out. And I'm going to recommend it for
Okay,
everyone listening as well. It hits on a
cool.
lot of ideas that we're talking about, that marketing is just out there to make you feel inferior. The other thing that I was going to bring up is that there's all these influencers out there, right? They're complete strangers that are just trying to
Oh
get you
yeah.
to that same point of saying, spend your money on this or spend your money in this way. And then they get a kickback of it, right? Like you just have to
Yeah.
realize all of these systems that are set up to try to
Yeah.
take money from us. Like once we start to get aware of it, that's kind of the first step, and it can be a really good first step. And once you begin to build this awareness, then you can make real change. How do you recommend people make actual lasting change to their behavior once they become aware of all this problem around them?
Yeah. So as you said, awareness is the first step. Awareness of the internal stuff is the first step, like the values, what's triggering you, the emotions, stuff like that. And just be curious about it, not judgmental, because we all have our things. And the second is like again awareness of the external stuff. So like social forces, influencers is a great example. Where are you being influenced? It could be social media, it could be your friends and family. And then the third thing is what we were talking about earlier too, is like the structural forces that are influencing you, whether that be products, the manipulation by these companies to kind of get you to spend, et cetera. And then the kind of big reframe here is like building those new patterns. So a lot of our financial decisions, like I said, are emotionally driven. So once you bring awareness to kind of that kind of chain reaction, you can find a way to break it. So like if I spend more money when I'm anxious, okay, now I know that. I know anxiety, then that's the action. Maybe I can break that cycle and replace the buying with a healthier way to deal with my anxiety. And I think, the other thing I really recommend is just adding as much friction as possible, like making it as easy as possible to save and as hard as possible to spend money. And so, like, making it easier to save, setting up auto pay, just like those little nudge things that just makes it easier so you don't have to consciously make the decision because we're making thousands of decisions a day and we're often very cognitively depleted by the end of the day. And the other thing is with spending is like, you know, going back to the companies, they're spending tons and tons of money to make buying something as frictionless as humanly possible. Like if you think about like the Amazon
Hmm.
one click to buy, like that's the best example. Like they have nailed frictionless shopping. How can you make it a little bit more difficult for yourself? So that could be, like deleting your credit card payment information from your computer,
Hmm.
deleting shopping apps from your phone. If I want to spend over a certain amount of money, like $150 or $200, I typically will wait 24 hours before I buy that thing to make sure it's something that I actually want. Just adding a little bit more friction and little things like that actually can have a really outsized impact on your money.
Yeah, the 24-hour rule is one of the like biggest behavioral things that I preach, because if you can just get yourself to
Yeah.
pause, you're going to realize so many more times than not that you don't need the thing. My wife and I, we have an Amazon cart day where everything we put in the cart has to wait until Friday. We can't purchase anything except on a Friday evening when we check it. And usually when we check it, we remove everything from the cart because we just don't need it. But there's still that dopamine hit of doing the online
Yeah.
shopping and claiming that you found the deal. So you put it in the cart and it's so exciting, and then that wears off and yeah, I don't really need that. And on the flip side of there still being the extreme savers side of things, maybe you need to remove your investing apps off your phone. Maybe you need
Yeah.
to set a specific time period that you check on it so that you're not constantly filling your mind with, should I invest in this way? Do I need to save in this different way? So it can go to both sides. You don't just need to put friction in the saving or in the spending side of things. You could also use some friction in the saving side of things to really just give your mind a break. I think that can be a huge deal to just calm your mind down.
I'm a big fan of everything you just said. I live in New York, which is obviously a little bit more walkable and accessible than other places in America, but I even try to go a step further and I try to physically go buy the item in person as opposed to
Mm.
ordering on Amazon. It's obviously way more annoying to do this, but typically I'm able to support small businesses that way. But two, it adds so much friction. So to get to the point where I'm like, do I even need to go buy this thing? Because it's just like so much added steps to go purchase that. The other thing is, I loved what you talked about on the other side with savings because I am somebody who I'm more anxious with money. And so, an anxious habit I have is like that compulsive checking, where whenever I
Hmm.
feel overwhelmed or uncertain, I'll check my bank accounts, just over and over again. And newsflash, your bank account typically doesn't change too much throughout the day. But,
No.
it's just, again, it's like this self soothing thing where it's like, okay, I'm in control, I'm in control. So, love what you suggested. Similar to kind of your Amazon cart on Fridays, I actually have like a calendar block on Fridays that's like it's called worry block. And what I'll do is if I start to get overwhelmed about something, it could be financial, it could be otherwise, I will just write it in like the description of that
Hmm.
calendar hold. And then I'm like, you're not going to check anything. And if you want to check, you can check on Friday, or you can worry about it during this period of time. And kind of similar to your Amazon example, a lot of times what will happen is by the time I'll get to that period of time, I'm not feeling those anxious feelings anymore. I'm like, okay, I don't need to go through and like check every single account, feeling
Hmm.
a lot better. So again, yeah, two sides of the same coin, just great advice overall.
Yeah. And maybe if you feel that worry, like for me, it's just setting a reminder on my phone, right? I put it out of my mind and somewhere else and say, I can worry about that on Thursday at 6 p.m. And that's when I'll think about that thing. And you usually get to
Yeah.
it. And like you said, the worry and the anxiety around it is gone. So if you really do need to think about it, your mind is a whole lot more clear to actually address the problem. Or you get to it and you're like, why was I worried about that? And then you mark
Yep.
it off and you move on. So more times than not, you're going to be able to just move on from all these things that are trying to consume our mind. And I think that's a really great place to leave it on, that both the savings and spending side of this coin have things that we need to be careful of and things that we need to take steps to actually change our behavior, like whether it's deleting apps, whether it's setting
Yeah.
reminders, calendar events, specific times to do stuff. Those are all great tips there. And Hannah, thank you so much for coming on the episode and coming on the show. I have two final questions here to wrap us up. The first one's going to be, how can people connect with you online if they wanted to reach out or had more questions?
Yeah. So the main place you can reach me is on Substack. I write a newsletter called Your Brain on Money, where I basically explore all the forces that are driving our financial decisions. It's free. I publish twice a week. You can also find me on almost any social channel, also Your Brain on Money, where I talk about kind of similar topics. And yeah, that's pretty much everywhere you can find me.
Fantastic. And of course, links will be in the show notes if you want to go find Hannah online and connect. But final question I have here, Hannah, is what's one thing that you wish you had known sooner when you were just getting started with money about your money mindset?
Yes. I would say if you are struggling with your relationship with money, no amount of money is going to change that relationship that you have to it. So I think there's a tendency to believe, oh, if I just made more money, I would, have a better relationship with it. When really it's the internal work that really needs to be done and understanding, what's driving your behavior and starting to unlearn it that way.
Yeah, we'll leave it on that mic drop moment that no amount of money is going to change how you handle it, how you feel about it. So, Hannah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
What a fantastic conversation. And as we round out this episode, I want to talk about a few things here to wrap up. One of my favorite things to teach is using money as a tool. Beginning to help people understand their goals and values and how to use money towards that. It's one of the most empowering and awesome things that you get to do as a financial planner. It is so fun to tell people, yeah, you have permission to do what you want to do with your money. And you can help them realize that they can accomplish their dreams and they can accomplish the thing that is perfectly aligned with their values, like spending time with their family, going on a trip, saving more money, whatever it may be. It's one of my favorite things about being a financial planner. And so I really enjoyed today's conversation, and I hope each of you listening were able to enjoy it as well. Thank you again to Hannah for coming on the show. Be sure to check out her work online. The links, of course, are in the show notes. And I would love to hear what each and every one of you listening thought about today's episode. On Spotify or YouTube, you can leave a comment on this specific episode, and I'll make sure to reply to them as well. Or if you'd like to, send me an email. Let me know what you thought. And that does it for today's episode. Next week's episode is going to be a really special one, so make sure you subscribe and stick around for next week. But thank you so much for tuning into Money Talk today and over the last 4+ years. We talked about a lot of great things today, especially around using your money as a tool. And if you like today's conversation, you're certainly going to love Financial Planning for Young Adults. So be sure to head over there to check out my new show, Financial Planning for Young Adults, and you can find it right where you're listening to this show. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The best way to stay up to date and connected with all things Money Talk is to subscribe to the podcast. Have a question or a comment? You can find links in the show notes to email me or leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube. And if you're looking to get started with budgeting, sign up for a Money Talk today. I'd love to work with you and help you with your budgeting. The link is in the show notes. And if you're a young adult or no one in your life who could benefit from some great financial planning advice, check out Financial Planning for Young Adults right where you're listening to this show. And remember, the best way to learn from today's episode is to go and have a money talk about today's topic with a fellow money buddy. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Money Talk. I'm your host, Skylar Fleming. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Money Talk. This show is provided for informational and entertainment purposes and may not be specific to your unique situation. Please be sure to do additional research before making any financial decisions.